there is a story hidden behind the headlines of the Middle East, a story most people never connect. When people hear about Israel, Palestine, and the endless conflicts around Jerusalem, they usually think it started in modern politics, maybe in 1948, maybe during colonial history. But what if the roots of this conflict go back thousands of years, long before modern borders existed, to a time when prophets walked the earth and entire civilizations worshipped idols? What if the story begins with a forgotten god called Baal and a prophet who stood completely alone against an entire society? Thousands of years ago, in the ancient lands of the Levant, the people did not worship the Creator alone. Instead, they built temples and altars for a powerful idol known as Baal. Baal was believed to control rain, storms, fertility, and power over nature. Kings honored him, priests protected his temples, and ordinary people feared him. Entire civilizations organized their lives around this idol. But then a man stood up in the middle of the system and challenged everything. That man was Prophet Ilyas. According to the Qur'an, he confronted his people with a simple but devastating question. Why do you call upon Baal and abandon the best of creators? Imagine standing alone against an entire culture, an entire belief system, an entire political structure. Yet this is exactly what prophets did throughout history. The land where this happened is not just any land. It is the land where some of the greatest prophets in history lived. Prophet Ibrahim walked its valleys. Prophet Musa led his people through its deserts. Prophet Dawud ruled there with justice. Prophet Isa preached there with miracles. And in the center of this land stands one of the holiest sites in Islam, Masjid al-Aqsa. This is not just a historical location. For Muslims, it is a sacred ground, the place connected to one of the most extraordinary moments in Islamic history, the night journey of Prophet Muhammad, known as Isra and Mi'raj. In that moment, the Prophet was taken from Makkah to al-Aqsa, where he led all previous prophets in prayer. Symbolically, it meant that the message of Islam was the continuation and completion of the message brought by every prophet before him. But the Quran tells us something deeply unsettling about this land. It describes cycles of corruption and power that repeat through history. In Surah al-Isra, there is a warning about the children of Israel causing corruption in the land more than once. Each time, the corruption grows, power increases, and eventually, consequences follow. Many scholars interpret these verses not just as ancient history, but as a pattern that repeats throughout civilizations. Nations rise with faith and moral purpose, then slowly drift into arrogance, injustice, and oppression. Fast forward thousands of years to the modern world, and you begin hearing discussions about something called Greater Israel, some political and religious interpretations imagine borders stretching far beyond the current state, sometimes referencing ancient descriptions that extend from the Nile to the Euphrates. It is a controversial and heavily debated idea, but it appears frequently in geopolitical discussions across the Middle East. For many Muslims, hearing this raises a chilling question. Is this simply political ambition, or part of a much older struggle over the Holy Land? To understand why the issue runs so deep in the Muslim world, you have to understand what Masjid al-Aqsa represents. For Muslims, it is not just a mosque. It was the first direction Muslims prayed toward before the Kaaba. It is mentioned in the Quran as blessed land. It is the place where the Prophet of Islam led every prophet of history in prayer. That moment symbolized something profound, that the message of monotheism, from Adam to Muhammad, is one continuous chain. When Muslims look at the region today, many do not see just a political conflict. They see a spiritual test repeating across centuries. The same land that once witnessed the confrontation between Prophet Ilyas and the worshippers of Baal is again at the center of global tension. History keeps circling back to the same place, the same land, the same question: who truly stands for justice? And who uses power to dominate? But the Quran tells these stories for a reason that goes beyond criticizing others. They are warnings for everyone. Every nation can fall into the same trap. Every civilization can forget its moral compass. The Qur'an repeatedly shows how powerful empires collapsed when they became arrogant and unjust. Pharaoh believed he was unstoppable, yet his kingdom vanished beneath the sea. Nimrod believed he could challenge God himself, yet history remembers him as a tyrant who failed. So when we look at the conflicts surrounding Jerusalem today, perhaps the deeper lesson is not about which empire will dominate the land. The deeper lesson is the same one prophets have repeated for thousands of years. Power is temporary, but truth remains. Empires rise and fall. Nations expand and collapse. But the message brought by prophets has always been the same. Worship the Creator alone. Stand against injustice. And remember that history is never just about the past. Sometimes it is a mirror reflecting the choices we make today. And maybe that is why the story of Baal, the prophets, and the Holy Land still echoes through our world today. Because the real battle was never just about land, it was always about truth. But to truly understand why this land is always at the center of world events, we need to go even deeper into history. Because the story of the Holy Land is not just about one civilization or one religion, it is about a land that has been fought over for thousands of years by empires that believed they were destined to control it. From the Assyrians to the Babylonians, from the Romans to later empires, every powerful civilization that rose in the region eventually set its eyes on this same land. And yet, despite thousands of years of conquest, destruction, and rebuilding, the land continues to remain at the center of humanity's attention. It is almost as if history keeps circling back to the same place again and again. The Qur'an repeatedly reminds believers that the rise and fall of nations is never random. Power is given as a test, not a permanent privilege. When a society begins with justice and faith, it grows stronger. But when power turns into arrogance, corruption slowly spreads. The Qur'an describes how entire nations were destroyed when they crossed the limits set by God. Some were powerful beyond imagination. Some had wealth that seemed endless. Some believed they could never fall. Yet history remembers them today only as ruins and warnings. This is why many Muslims see the struggle surrounding Jerusalem as something deeper than politics, because the city has always been a symbol of something larger than itself. Jerusalem is where prophets preached, where revelations were received, and where the messages of monotheism confronted the forces of power and corruption again and again. When Prophet Dawud ruled the land, justice was the foundation of his kingdom. When Prophet Isa preached there, he challenged hypocrisy and spiritual corruption. And centuries later, when Prophet Muhammad was taken to Masjid al-Aqsa during Isra and Mi'raj, it symbolized the connection between all prophetic messages across time. But the Qur'an also warns about something else that is deeply relevant today: the danger of believing that power means permanent victory. Again and again, the Qur'an describes rulers who believed their dominance would last forever. Pharaoh believed no force could challenge him. Nimrod believed he could even challenge the Creator himself. Yet both became symbols of arrogance destroyed by divine justice. These stories are not just historical accounts. They are reminders that power without justice eventually collapses. And this is why discussions about ideas like Greater Israel create strong reactions across the Muslim world. Because to many people, it raises fears that the same historical patterns of expansion, domination, and conflict are repeating once again in the very land where prophets once struggled against oppression. Whether these fears are exaggerated or not, the emotional reaction shows how deeply connected Muslims feel to the fate of the Holy Land. It is not simply a geopolitical issue for them. It is connected to their faith, their history, and their understanding of the prophetic legacy. Another reason this land is so significant in Islamic thought is because many scholars believe it will play an important role in events before the end of time. Numerous traditions mention the region of Sham which historically includes modern Syria, Palestine, Jordan, and Lebanon. For centuries, scholars have reflected on these narrations and what they might mean for the future. While interpretations differ, one thing is clear. The region around Jerusalem has always been viewed as spiritually significant in the unfolding of history. But perhaps the most important lesson is the one that the Qur'an quietly emphasizes throughout all these stories. The real battle has never been about territory alone. It has always been about moral responsibility. Every nation that gains power faces the same test. Will it establish justice? Or will it become corrupted by the very power it possesses? When justice disappears, the downfall of that power eventually follows. This is why the story of Prophet Ilyas confronting the worshippers of Baal still feels relevant today. Imagine standing alone against an entire system that had normalized something false. Imagine speaking the truth even when it was unpopular, even when it threatened the interests of those in power. That is what prophets did throughout history. They reminded people that truth does not change simply because a society decides to ignore it. And maybe that is the deeper reason why the story of the Holy Land never fades from global attention. The land itself has witnessed thousands of years of humanity's struggle between faith and power, justice and corruption, truth and arrogance. Each generation thinks it is living in a completely new era, yet the same patterns appear again and again. Empires rise believing they will last forever. New leaders emerge promising stability and dominance. Political alliances shift, borders change, and conflicts erupt. Yet beneath all of these changes, the same ancient questions remain. Who will uphold justice? And who will allow power to corrupt them? The Quran leaves us with a powerful reminder about how history ultimately unfolds. Victory does not always belong to those with the greatest armies or the strongest political alliances. Sometimes the people who appear weakest in the moment are the ones who ultimately endure. Sometimes truth survives even when it seems completely overshadowed by power. So when we look at the ongoing struggles surrounding Jerusalem, perhaps the real lesson is not simply about which side will control the land tomorrow. The deeper lesson is about the choices societies make when they are given power. Because history shows us something again and again. The fate of nations is not decided only on battlefields. It is decided by whether they choose justice or arrogance. And that is why the ancient story of Baal, the warnings of the prophets, and the modern conflicts around the Holy Land all feel strangely connected. They remind us that history is not just something that happened long ago. It is something that continues to unfold around us, shaped by the same moral choices that have defined civilizations for thousands of years. And perhaps the most unsettling thought of all is this: every generation believes it understands history until it suddenly realizes that it has become part of the story itself.